Good afternoon. Everyone hearing me?
Hearing you, sir, but not seeing you. Maybe you could
no,
press the button for your camera.
Camera should be on. I'll go again. No, I've got a blue light behind the camera, but it doesn't seem to be working.
Is it pressed on the bottom 5 control panels there? Maybe you can go to settings, which is just to the right of your camera.
Documents. It must be. I got settings.
There you are, sir. You're all set. Okay, great.
I know what's happened. I need to get out of settings. There we go. As I said a little earlier today, I've always thought that the greatest advance in communication was the fountain pen. So I'm taking a little time to catch up. Let me begin by welcoming you all to the first ever virtual meeting of the Political Committee. Today we'll consider 2 of our committee's 4 draft reports. And for me, and I'm sure for all of you, I'm sure it's been a very strange few months. But I'm delighted nonetheless that we can meet to deliberate on our reports. And I therefore formally call the committee to order and declare the committee meeting open. I'd also like to express my gratitude to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly Secretariat for adjusting to these difficult circumstances and making it possible for us to meet online today. And let me also use this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to a new director, Andreas Havisius, and to wish him well in his new role. He was formerly director of the Civil Dimension of Secure Committee, and some of you may know him already from that. We will do our very best to keep this meeting to under 2 hours, and if needed, we will have to exercise some control in our debates to keep us on time. I will structure the meeting in the following way. After the presentation of the draft reports, we will collect comments, and the director will take note of these. I'll come and in due course, I'll indicate what will happen to your comments and what he will do with them. If you'd like to take the floor following the presentation of the reports, please click on the Request to Speak button and we will add you to our list. You can do this at any time. Should you experience technical difficulties, please make use of the chat box where our committee coordinator, Karen Walker-Love, will provide assistance. Please note that all relevant documents, such as the draft agenda and draft reports, can be found under the Documents button on the right-hand side of your screen. Please also note that this meeting, as I think we've been told, will be recorded for communication purposes in our publications on our website and on our social media channels. Please contact the committee director if you or any member has any concerns or if any member wishes to be exempted from this activity. This event is on record and a press release will be available after the event. One other thing I should have said, perhaps of significance domestically, is that following the general election, the United Kingdom delegation, of which I'm a member, has been restructured, and a number of colleagues will be joining us today, not only for the first meeting of the committee, but for their first meeting of any committee of the Assembly. Now, moving to the first item for today, I would now ask the committee to take up the agenda for these proceedings and ask, are there any comments or objections? I don't see any, and on that footing, the agenda is now adopted. And I'd now like to ask Jerry Connolly, not only a good colleague, but a close friend, if we will present his report on the agenda on the rise of China, implications for global and Euro-Atlantic security. Jerry, welcome. The floor is yours. I think you may have to unmute.
Can I be heard now?
You can indeed.
Good, thank you. And thank you, Lord Campbell. And I just want to say to everybody, thank you all for participating. These are difficult circumstances. Thank you to our capable staff for organizing it. I think this is a very helpful platform. I also just want to express my solidarity with all of our allies and partners who are going through this pandemic. In my country, we are now hitting daily highs, both in the spread of the infection and the absolute number of infections. We're averaging 50 to 60,000 new cases a day. And the death rate, tragically, that had been going down is now rapidly going up because mortality is a lagging indicator or a lagging factor in the pandemic. So you expect to see mortality start to rise about 2 weeks after the rise of new cases. And we are certainly seeing that, especially in the southern and southwestern part of the United States. I think we have a lot to learn from a lot of our partners in terms of how best to try to contain this. So I thank my colleagues for their understanding and their commiseration and their solidarity. Let me get into my report, which is on the rise of China and its implications for global and Euro-Atlantic security. We'll recall that Allied leaders at their last meeting in London last December, for the first time, included a reference to China in their final statement. The rise of China was identified as an issue we should address together as an alliance. It was belated, but an important step. The rapid rise of the People's Republic of China in the last part of the 20th century and the first part of this represents a paradigm shift in global affairs comparable to the rise of the Soviet Union and its decline. And for too long, as an alliance, we've been negligent in recognizing the substantial challenge, if not threat, posed by the People's Republic of China. A confrontation between China and the Euro-Atlantic community is neither desirable nor inevitable, but a failure by NATO to take cognizance of China and its challenge that it presents could make confrontation over time more likely. Indeed, it would be irresponsible for Euro-Atlantic nations and institutions to further delay the revision of their strategies and capabilities in light of the profound changes prompted by the growing assertiveness of the world's most populous country. Excuse me just 1 second. My battery is running low here. Okay. As NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg stated at the unveiling of the NATO 2030 initiative in June of this year, the rise of China is fundamentally shifting the global balance of power, heating up the race for economic and technological supremacy, multiplying the threat to open societies and individual freedoms, and increasing the competition over our values and our way of life. China is investing in emerging technologies and state-of-the-art military capabilities, including more survivable and mobile intercontinental nuclear missiles capable of reaching Europe and North America, engaging in cyber espionage against NATO countries and domestic industries, crushing democracy in Hong Kong in violation of the UK-China 1997 agreement, establishing footholds in Africa and even in the Arctic, managing a competing infrastructure bank building islands in areas of the South China Sea contested by its neighbors, some of which are U.S. allies or major partners of Nato, and advancing a development initiative that encompasses more than 100 countries and a combined economic output of more than a quarter of total global GDP. Under Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese foreign policy was epitomized by the dictum, hide your capability and bide your time. Consequently, the country was building up its strength while keeping a low profile internationally. This approach has dramatically changed under Xi Jinping. Today's China is much more openly assertive. It's, if not to say aggressive. This is most evident in China's immediate neighborhood, but it has also begun to impact its relations with countries around the world. To back up its assertive policies, Beijing is employing military, economic, technological, diplomatic, and soft power capabilities it's been developing for decades. Militarily, China has acquired state-of-the-art military capabilities, such as long-range missiles, drones, hypersonic weapons, and stealth fighters. Some of these advances were enabled by China's theft of defense technology in the West. China's ability to project military power across the globe is increasing rapidly through investments in advanced missile technologies and the creation of a blue water navy. Closer to home, Beijing has harassed neighbors in the South China Sea, where it seeks to control vital sea lanes from the artificial islands it's created there in open disregard of international law and a flagrant violation of rulings from the Law of the Seas establishment. Economically, through its Belt and Road Initiative, which involves some 138 countries, China is gaining a firm geopolitical foothold, especially in weaker developing countries. For instance, the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, which I had a chance to visit in 2017, serves as an example of China's so-called debt trap diplomacy. In December 2017, the port, which had been financed by China, was taken over by a Chinese state-owned enterprise when the Sri Lankan government could no longer service the debt on that facility. The BRI strategy also makes China an important player in the Arctic, a region of crucial geopolitical importance for our alliance. Technologically, China's cyber espionage capabilities are formidable and aggressive. China hosts some of the world's biggest technology companies, such as Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu. And the independence of these companies from the central government is rightly questioned. And while Beijing invests heavily in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and robotics, it also forces technology transfers from foreign companies seeking access to the enormous Chinese market. Diplomatically, China is making a concerted push for leadership posts in global institutions such as the United Nations and its specialized agencies. The success of this campaign was demonstrated by the initial reaction of the World Health Organization to the emerging COVID-19 pandemic when WHO uncritically endorsed Chinese official positions and ignored substantive warnings from Taiwan. I'm extremely concerned that this growing Chinese influence in the United Nations will make the international system more comfortable for autocracies. We already see the signs of that happening with the Human Rights Council increasingly promoting the Chinese notion of state-directed development while downplaying the significance of individual rights. And where Beijing's prevented from exerting greater influence in existing forums, it sets up rival institutions such as the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. In terms of soft power, the Chinese government is estimated to be spending billions of dollars each year on educational exchanges, expansion of its foreign language media, and funding hundreds of Confucius institutes worldwide, intended to promote both Chinese language, culture, and political hegemony. Not one to let a crisis go to waste, China has continued to engage in destabilizing behavior amid the pandemic. Recently, China has increased its provocative military activities in the waters and skies near Taiwan and Japanese islands. It is tightening its death grip on democracy in Hong Kong. It is engaged in border clashes with India that resulted in deaths and reignited a territorial dispute with Bhutan. Aggressive state propaganda promotes an image of China as benevolent in its public health response, despite the country's early attempts to actually hide the outbreak of COVID-19 from the rest of the world. Chinese hackers are even targeting American and European scientific organizations conducting COVID-19 related research, especially in the development of a vaccine. Mr. Chairman, the challenge posed by China to the international order is so multifaceted, and it's impossible to cover it in just one report, let alone in this presentation. So rather than continue to summarize the breadth of the challenge we face, allow me to conclude by making three general observations on how we, the Euro-Atlantic community, can take meaningful action. First, the London Declaration must be followed up by recalibration of NATO's strategic documents, such as the strategic concept, as well as defense planning, training, and capability development priorities to take into account the rise of China. We should increase support to the allies that are most active in the Indo-Pacific region. I also suggest establishing a NATO Center of Excellence on the Indo-Pacific that can develop both a comprehensive understanding of the challenges we face for China and the necessary actions the alliance could and must take to deal with those challenges. Second, addressing the challenge of China is not a burden the alliance must bear alone. In the political, economic, regulatory spheres, the natural partner, of course, the EU-NATO communications should facilitate a more cohesive and strategic response to China, including China's investments in critical infrastructure. NATO and EU members should be talking in unison to China on these challenges. There should be no place for Chinese government-controlled companies in our critical 5G networks. In this context, I salute the recent decision by the United Kingdom to exclude Huawei equipment from its 5G networks. Furthermore, NATO should strengthen security cooperation with like-minded partners in the freedom of the seas, air, space, and cyberspace. In the case of Australia and Japan, it's time for an upgraded format of cooperation that includes intensive consultations, enhanced intelligence sharing, joint planning, and even joint exercises. And finally, the notion that the rise of China presents both risks and opportunities is a legitimate one, and we should explore opportunities for cooperation on common threats, such as piracy, terrorism, climate change. However, we should not be naive about this. We should make no mistake. China is not a friendly actor. It is a malign actor. It aims to disrupt the global liberal world order and undermine values that are at the very heart of our alliance and our societies. It builds coalitions with other malign actors, such as Russia, Iran, and North Korea, while attempting to divide, weaken, and undermine transatlantic unity. We can counter and deter these attempts only if we align our positions on China and speak with one voice. I hope that the COVID crisis has opened the eyes of many who saw China as more of an opportunity than a challenge. As NATO Deputy Secretary General Mircea Giona recently reminded us, 30 allies together represent 50% of global GDP, and we have 28 out of the 30 leading universities in the world. If we retain our unity, we will remain an unsurpassed political, economic, technological, and military bloc capable of protecting the values of liberal democracy. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
May have briefly lost the chairman. I'm sure he will come right back. perhaps while we can move on to the questions, if you're okay with that, Mr. Connolly.
Of course.
So we will bring up the first questioner then, which will be Raza Yuknevichnya from Lithuania, a member of the European Parliament.
Hello, everybody. Can you see me?
Yes, Raza, we can see you.
Okay. So, dear friends, dear colleagues, Lord Campbell, Congressman Connolly, really, I am very happy. It's very nice to be back in a community where I have spent 20 years and learned a lot. Today, when the transatlantic link needs to be safeguarded like never before, this assembly takes on a special meaning and value. And I am very happy to be part of NATO PA delegation in European Parliament. The pandemic has brought new aspects to the security environment. It is clear that it has not improved. The EU, European Union, has faced an institutional test as well as a test of solidarity, NATO as well. The first week was particularly difficult, but the follow-up showed that the EU has passed the solidarity test. I am welcoming very much, Congressman Connolly, your report, which is very timely and very to the point, very important one, because China has emerged as the biggest challenge these days. You mentioned united, the importance to unite, of united acting, in NATO, EU and US, but unfortunately up to now the EU and the US have slightly different approach so far. I will quote shortly Robert Kaplan with his very, very strong words. He said that Europe has always been happy to talk about unity and human rights, but without American leadership, Europe will be neutralized and eventually become the Western branch of Russian-Chinese-dominated Eurasia. So very strong words. I don't think, and I am not, would like not to happen so. But there is little doubt that China is a threat to Western democracy. So my question remains how to come up with a unified response strategy. We were able to have quite unified strategy on Russia, especially after 2014. But up to now, on China, there is no united approach, there is no united understanding, and especially when we in Europe see the situation on our transatlantic relations, especially in the light of German-US, some tensions and after the Brexit. So my concerns and my question, how to come up with a unified response strategy on China?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Rasa.
President Connolly, should we take all the questions at once, sir? Sorry to interrupt you. Or would you like to rest?
Well, let me start with this one, if I may, and then we can take two or three at a time. I think that's a great question, and that's why I'm presenting this paper. I think we have to put China on the agenda. What is remarkable, really, when you think about it, is that prior to really this last year, China wasn't even mentioned in NATO documents. It didn't exist, either as a threat or an opportunity. And I think we begin forging, I hope, a unified position with respect to acknowledging the challenge and the opportunity China may represent, is starting to include it in documents about our strategic planning, about our sense of the threat assessment, in taking cognizance of this enormous expansion of China's influence in the world in which we live. It's not just any longer an Asian concern, and China's aggression under President Xi is now getting kinetic. We just saw that on the border with India. And there is very much the threat of that with a number of its neighbors in the Asia-Pacific region, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, all of whom feel the threat of a growing Chinese presence militarily as well as economically. And then I cited the Sri Lanka example. This ought to concern all of us who are donor nations in terms of this sort of debt extortion that China engages in as the dark side of the One Belt, One Road initiative in its financing. So it makes financing easy up front. Terms and conditions are limited compared to the West. And then when the recipient can't meet those debt obligations, then China calls in the bill. And in the case of Sri Lanka, it built this beautiful brand new port. And when Sri Lanka couldn't meet the debt service, it offered a long-term, many-decade lease that China would undertake to manage that port. Now, that port is on the southern tip of Sri Lanka. About 30% of all the world's shipping goes right by there. It's a potential threat, if it's ever used militarily, to India. And it is a clear expansion outside of the South China Sea region. And so we've also seen, this affects NATO, we talked about this a few years ago when I did a paper on the Arctic. China is aggressively insisting it ought to have a special associate status, even though it's not an Arctic literal nation. It's not part of the Arctic Council, but it's insisted it ought to be in the form of an associate membership. It's talked about investing in Greenland, an Arctic nation or part of the Arctic world, and actually building a presence there with as many as 15,000 Chinese in Greenland, which would make it the largest minority population on the island. And given China's population, they could go a lot bigger than that. So they're aggressively moving into all of our theaters. And we have to take cognizance of that. We have to debate like this and discuss what is the nature of the challenge we face and how do we want to face it. But we can't not pay attention. We can't continue to ignore China and its growing economic power, its growing military power, and the fact that it's an aggressive power, willing to use force to execute its will. And their values are not our values. And if NATO represents not only a collective security alliance, but also a collective value advocate for democratic liberal values, we have to pay attention to what China represents as an alternative vision. Ethan, why don't we take several questions now, and I'll try to respond to 2 or 3 at a time.
Yes, sir. We have the next question from Ahmet Yildiz from Turkey. We'll bring him up for you.
Wait a minute. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Greetings from Ankara, and thanks for this efficient summary of the report. Jerry, I agree strongly with you that China will be a malign actor, taking into consideration their record on human rights, especially in Uyghur region, and on other human rights violations, and the Chinese behavior in the South China Sea against the neighbors. I wish in the report to see something about Japan also. You put some paragraphs on Chinese relations, Chinese attitude to some regions, some neighbors. But Japan is a very important partner for NATO and under the protection of the US. Sometimes, as far as I know, they think about rearmament against Chinese domination, against Chinese threat. That's why, if possible, I wish you put a sentence or paragraph about Japan's case. Secondly, on the southern flank countries like Turkey, their relationship with China. Of course, geography dictates something. For example, Turkey has a huge trade deficit with China. The export is about 2 billion, but the import is about 20 billion. And Turkey has its own connectivity projects before Belt and Road Initiative of China to connect Central Asia with the Mediterranean ports like Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan. All these projects are not necessarily part of Chinese initiative, but some of them are in line and compatible with Chinese projects. Some of them are not. Secondly, that this missile issue with China, it was not something intended. It was a tender, and China has bid the least price. But later it changed because the pricing and the other countries' companies participated in the tender changed, and this tender was cancelled. Now China is out of question for supplying anti-ballistic missiles to Turkey. That's why we cannot consider Turkish relationship with China as extensively working with China. It is somehow a pragmatic relationship dictated by needs and geography. I will be happy if you take these into consideration in the wording of the final report. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have Mr. Tomas Velasek, who would like to ask a question. We'll bring him up for you.
Hi. Hopefully this works. Can you all hear me? Brilliant. Many thanks for bringing me in. Many thanks to the Parliamentary Assembly for obviously allowing this meeting and holding it in the first place, to our very capable chairman for convening us, and a huge thanks to Congressman Connolly, Jerry, if I may, for the excellent reports. I apologize, I missed part of your presentation for technical reasons. I had to switch to iPad, but I'll comment on the report rather than your presentation. So I apologize in advance if you already addressed some of the issues that I'm about to raise. In fact, it's just one. The report is very well written, and the diagnosis that you laid out, both in the reports and in the presentation, the bit I heard, I can completely agree with. I guess the bits where I thought more clarity would be useful in the report itself is on the legal basis for NATO to act and to get involved, which then determines the types of and the scope of the action prescribed. You rightly say that a number of allies question whether China falls under the North Atlantic bid, hence whether the mutual defense clause would apply. You also wisely point out that the preamble also commits allies to safeguard certain principles and values, democracy and rule of law. The implication of the preamble, though, the way I understand it, is that it obviously speaks of the need to safeguard our societies, so domestically within the borders. It's more about resilience, if you will. It's more about protecting the order at home, which begs the question whether the recommendations, which go more in the nature of assisting the U.S. activities in the region, whether they go in the nature of possibly even exploring the issues of a stronger maritime involvement, are consistent with the understanding of the preamble, which again speaks of the need to defend sort of the domestic order based on principles of democracy, rule of law we have at home. What I'm getting at again is a simple recommendation, if I may. I think the report would be I guess easier than to instrumentalize, easier to imagine what sort of action could flow therefrom if we had a bit more clarity on the legal basis for the rest of the allies to act, which would then also help us figure out what's the best course of action to follow. I struggle, for example, just to give you my last sentence, struggle, for example, a little bit to understand what sorts the European allies could offer to the United States. This is not to disagree again with the basic premise that one of the most useful things that allies can do is to assist more our biggest ally, the United States, with activities in the area. But you, perhaps to elaborate it, because it is a difficult question, skirt the issue of what sort of assistance could that be? Are we talking about assisting directly in the region through possibly also military assistance, which brings us back to the question of legal basis, or are we discussing, are we hinting at the possibility of picking up slack in the defense of the European continent and elsewhere, which would then allow the United States to free more of its resources to focus on China? That's the one example of an area where I thought a bit more guidance and clarity could be useful. But again, this is not at all to besmirch the report, which I thought was very well argued, and I'm very grateful for. Thank you.
Next questioner will be Ojars Kalnins from Latvia. Sometimes takes a second. There he is. Okay.
Oh, George, you need to unmute.
Well, we may have lost him briefly. We can move to the next questioner and then bring Ojars after that, if that's possible. It'll be Luca Frusone from Italy. Seems we may have lost Luca as well. Okay, we'll move on to the next questioner, Cheryl Gallant from Canada. Please, Ms. Gallant.
I wish to congratulate Congressman Connolly. What I found particularly compelling was the aspect of what had gone on with Sri Lanka, and I am wondering whether or not you could add to this report a map showing every port, every airport that China controls presently in the world. Just, black and white map with black boundaries and showing red spots and labeling whatever it controls, and keeping that up to date until the time of the report being tabled at least. Would that be possible?
Sure.
Thank you.
Move on to thank you very much, Ms. Gallant. Next questioner will be Lord Anderson from the United Kingdom.
Ethan, while we're waiting,
Yep.
why don't I try to respond to some of what we've already heard? I appreciate very much the comments from Ahmed from Turkey. We need more in Japan. I think that's a good suggestion. We should expand it a little bit on Japan. And also the role China is playing in southern flank NATO countries, both in financing and the supply of military equipment. So we will do that. Thomas, said we need clarity on the legal basis for NATO to get involved, and I think that's absolutely well said, and we will definitely try to beef that up so that the recommendations are in a context. I would just say that, again, I think historically we've kind of looked at China as a regional issue, and I think we need to make the transition to understanding China is an issue that affects NATO and indeed the globe. Its cyber hacking mechanisms and organization are a threat to Western Europe and North America. The whole question of the next generation 5G and who controls it is very much in the European lap and the North American lap, and it affects us directly. So we have lots of reasons to be concerned, even above what China's aggression in the South China Sea and the Asia Pacific region. But we will absolutely look at the legal rationale and try to clarify that. Canada, Cheryl, I think a map makes a lot of sense. We might even want to expand that map to where the One Belt, One Road initiative goes, so you can see the global influence of that. It's pretty dramatic. And with that, back to you, Ethan, for Luca and Lord Anderson.
Okay, with that, we tried to resolve a few of those small technical glitches we had in the background. And now I believe we can bring up Mr. Collins from Latvia. So hopefully we can have a question from him. Sir, the floor is yours.
The lower page now.
You're still muted, Mr. Collins. If you could please hit the microphone and the center button on the bottom of your screen. Nope, I still can't hear you. There's a mic on, mic off button in the middle of the... Okay. Perhaps it may be need to go to media settings in your settings, sir, and then you can hit the speaker, which would allow you to... The settings button, the cog, in there should be a media settings tab, and that should allow you to put on your speaker, sir. Still can't hear you, sir. I'm very sorry. Okay. Okay. We'll move on to the next question then. All right. This time we'll try once again to bring Luca Frustone up from Italy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Luca, we can hear you.
Sorry, my headphones are made in China, so I have some problem. No. I would like to speak in Italian, so please change the channel. Ok, ringrazio innanzitutto il relatore per questo lungo lavoro e anche molto specifico. Ci sono alcune parti dove mi riservo la possibilità di mandare magari alcuni accorgimenti, però il più importante lo anticipo già in questo momento, perché nella parte finale è molto interessante le conclusioni a cui arriva il relatore, ma c'è una parte che mi ha colpito quando lei cita Brennan a proposito dei porti degli alleati che potrebbero essere addirittura di proprietà cinese, e questo è un rischio serio. Per questo proprio in quell'aspetto si potrebbe fare un maggior riferimento alle normative nazionali. Mi spiego meglio. Una cosa che potremmo fare è fungere da stimolo per diversi paesi che ad oggi non hanno una normativa adeguata per difendersi proprio dalle scalate delle società cinesi nei confronti delle società nazionali di settori strategici. Come Italia noi avevamo una golden sharing trasformata in golden power che sta dando i suoi risultati. A seguito del Covid c'è un dibattito per implementarla anche oltre le società private che appunto ricevono offerte da compagnie cinesi. Stiamo pensando di andare oltre in alcuni dibattiti che abbiamo avuto proprio per mettere al riparo ancora di più determinati asset, ma addirittura dico determinate attività produttive delle intere filiere, perché ci siamo trovati. Faccio l'esempio delle mascherine sanitarie che in Italia purtroppo non producevamo in quantità sufficienti e per questo abbiamo avuto bisogno dell'aiuto di tanti paesi alleati che ringrazio, non smetterò mai di ringraziare, e quindi estendere questo ragionamento anche su interi settori in un certo senso. Quindi ecco, potrebbe essere utile, siccome abbiamo anche un ruolo politico come Nato e come Assemblea parlamentare, di pungolo verso altri paesi che ancora non si sono dotati di normative adeguate per evitare questo, definiamo, intromissione, non so come definirla, però con questa azione della Cina. Grazie.
Okay, we will move on to an additional question from
probably he wants
Mr. Connolly. Sorry, I can't hear you, sir.
He's muted.
Okay, we'll move on to another question from Representative Shimkus from the United States. I would also like to briefly say to Mr. Collins from Latvia, please, since we are unable to connect you, could you please write your question in and I can then read it out for our attendees and for Mr. Connolly. Thank you. Mr. Shimkus?
Great.
And then somebody needs to unmute Mr. Connolly.
Great. This is great. Even with the difficulties, the great report, Jerry. Thank you, very
John.
much. And I want to just focus on kind of comments from Thomas and Rasa and Luca, which are talking about the same thing. Thomas talked about what legal authority do we have, right? What in a parliamentary assembly or the NATO itself, what are the parameters that we can do? And we've always had this debate of outside the area operations. That made me think about our positions as parliamentarians, either in our distinct countries or as in Rasa, she's in the EU. And Jerry, you mentioned it. You mentioned 5G is a perfect example of how we as collective nations, whether we do it in a NATO PA policy paper or we do it in our home countries or we do it in the EU, we need to start sending signals. And that is dollars and cents and access. I think Luca mentioned it too. Jerry, you remember probably when the Chinese was trying to buy part of that port in San Francisco, and we have our CFIUS law, which other countries ought to look at the ability to really do a deep dive in contracts and tie in national security in that aspect. Again, I think we've all learned we're reliant on China for many more things than we all ever wanted to or thought we would be. And PPE is a perfect example. I think in the United States, we're trying to bring that equipment back to be manufactured in the United States just for the sake of health and wellness and preparation for the next pandemic. But you can also talk about the issue of rare earth minerals, which we are totally reliant upon mostly from China. And that's all our electronics, that's military guidance systems and communications stuff that we're doing over right now is rare earth. So I think the report's great, especially from an international parliamentary approach when we're like-minded colleagues are making a statement, not just to NATO itself, but really to our respective countries. And again, I think also in this way to the EU, that we better take this seriously, and we ought to use the levers that we have available, within the constraints of law, and that's trade and access and, again, ports and negotiation stuff. So this is great report. I appreciate it. I just wanted to weigh in on that we can take country roles or European roles to be united in sending a signal to China that they're going too far. And with that, I'll yield back my time.
Moving on, we have a question. Sir, Mr. Connolly, would you like to answer? Go ahead. We'll have to unmute your mic, sir.
Thank you. I want to thank John, my colleague from Illinois, for his comments. Very pertinent. I also wanted to react to what Luca had to say. I think it's a good suggestion that we may want to encourage other countries in terms of how they can protect their own interests and their assets from effectively being controlled by China through the mechanism of debt and debt service. I will add, in Sri Lanka, when I was there was open talk of very substantial bribes to influence the decision of whether or not to agree to the contract with China to manage the Hambantota port. And that's another part that often we think we're too polite to discuss, but it's absolutely part of the tool in the toolkit China employs with impunity. Luca and John both brought up something really important that is relevant right now to all of us, and that is the supply chain. And what we discovered in this pandemic was that many of us were heavily reliant on China, both for medical equipment and for necessary pharmacological agents and drugs. It is said in the United States, for example, that about 80% of our PPE, our personal protective equipment, gloves, masks, gowns, come from China. And as a result, we had an enormous supply shortage as the pandemic began and grew in the United States. And I know many of our European partners had the same experience, and Luca talked about Italy. And of course, that got aggravated by the fact that the pandemic began in China. So it was understandable to a certain extent that China wanted to husband those resources for its own population. But that created a real backlog in orders as demand was growing in other countries such as ours. Likewise, critical medical supplies. It is said that, for example, 80% of either the agents or the actual antibiotics themselves in North America come from China. And even if that's an exaggerated number, the reliance on that supply chain is quite evident. And so I think that is a legitimate national security concern for all NATO members. And we should talk about that as well. Thank you.
Mr. Connolly, I've received the question from Ojar's Collins. I'll read it to you, sir.
Sure.
I welcome the reference on paragraph 69 to NATO-EU cooperation on China. NATO-EU cooperation on many levels is increasing, which is good. However, the present U.S. administration has some differences with the European Union. What are the differences in EU and U.S. policies toward China that could create some problems, in your opinion? Also, how real is the NATO-China Council? And I can bring up another question, or if you'd like me to, sir.
Ethan, I could not hear that last part. How, and then you would...
Sorry, sir. How real is the NATO-China Council idea? And would you like to answer, sir?
Sure. With respect to differences between Europe and the United States, I think we have to separate goals and objectives from tactics and methods. I I believe that understandably there is resistance among many of our partners to unilateral actions by anybody, certainly by the United States. We are stronger when we act collectively and we show respect in consulting with our allies and partners. And I would hope moving forward that would characterize U.S. policy and hopefully heal some of the wounds that have been created unnecessarily in executing a coherent policy with respect to China and the challenge it represents. I think our goals, I think we're going to have this debate. But I think the debate has to begin with understanding the rising power of China and what that represents, given the fact that China aggressively rejects liberal democracy. And it's practicing that every day in its own country, in Hong Kong, and in challenging other systems in the Asia-Pacific rim. So I think moving forward, the goal is to find common ground so that we speak with one voice and have a collective sense of the nature of the challenge. And we're kind of beginning, aren't we, in that, because frankly, NATO has almost no history in even addressing China. So we start with a tabula rasa that maybe is useful, but also can be a handicap given the fact we don't have a lot of precedent. I hope that answers that question. There was I'm sorry, the second question, Ethan, was from Ojars?
He refers to the NATO-China Council.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have lots of machinery within NATO to address various and sundry issues. We have mechanisms to invite participation depending on how we categorize the status of certain nations in other parts of the world. So I have every confidence that we could create such a body to monitor Chinese activity, to look for opportunities, and to address challenges. Ethan,
I have another question for you, sir.
There you go.
Coming from Italy. It seems as Paolo Formentini. Please bring up to the floor.
Sì. Buongiorno, I speak Italian. In Italia abbiamo assistito a un'infodemia tremenda proveniente dalla Cina nei mesi più duri del coronavirus. Abbiamo avuto un bombardamento vero e proprio di notizie che esaltavano gli aiuti provenienti dalla Cina. Aiuti che poi si sono rivelati un cavallo di Troia verso l'Italia da parte della Cina. Aiuti che spesso si sono anche dimostrati non veri aiuti, ma contratti del nostro governo con il governo cinese. Ecco, ma sono stati venduti come aiuti e sulle nostre TV di Stato, sulla RAI, la radio e televisione italiana, è stato dato il triplo spazio agli aiuti cinesi rispetto agli aiuti provenienti dagli Stati Uniti. Gli Stati Uniti hanno stanziato 100 milioni di dollari per l'Italia, eppure solo un terzo dello spazio, sono studi, analisi che sono state fatte, è stato dedicato agli aiuti provenienti dagli Stati Uniti. Noi abbiamo combattuto contro la disinformazione, che era totale, pochi quotidiani sono rimasti liberi in Italia, volevo portarvi questa mia testimonianza, lo abbiamo fatto anche con atti parlamentari, chiedendo anche l'istituzione di una commissione d'inchiesta sulle origini del virus, che va ribadito anche in questa sede, è un virus cinese che proviene dalla Cina. Ma il virus più pericoloso che può provenire dalla Cina, e dobbiamo esserne consapevoli come membri dell'Assemblea parlamentare della Nato, è il virus che mina la democrazia. Dobbiamo tornare a essere orgogliosi di far parte del mondo libero, delle democrazie, e fare quello che il mondo occidentale ha fatto nei confronti dell'Unione Sovietica nei decenni scorsi. Dobbiamo avere lo stesso entusiasmo, la stessa forza e la stessa convinzione nei nostri ideali. Quindi grazie di cuore per questo rapporto, è qualcosa che noi sentiamo davvero come necessario. Grazie.
Yes, sir. Unmute Mr. Connolly's mic, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Paulo. He couldn't have put it better. There is another virus, and it's the virus against democracy. And China, spreads that virus with great skill. And we saw that, as Paulo just said, even to the point of taking credit for providing supplies, in fact, it did not provide, or providing supplies that didn't work, and touting its great benevolence in helping a country in great pain, in this case, Italy. And that goes to disinformation. We have been very focused, NATO, the NATO alliance, on disinformation campaigns coming from Russia. And we have seen the malign impact it can have. We saw them, get involved in the elections, for example, with Montenegro and Northern Macedonia in wanting to join the alliance. They got involved in media in spreading disinformation to discourage their accession as members of NATO. So this directly affects us because the Chinese are equally skilled in that kind of disinformation and are more than willing, aggressively, to use the tools, social media tools at their disposal to spread that disinformation. And that is a direct concern of NATO's, both in our values and our collective security. So thank you, Paulo, for bringing that up.
Our next questioner is Lord Anderson from the United Kingdom. Again, we'll try and bring him up this time for you, sir. Does seem that Lord Anderson might be having a trouble with his connection to the meeting. In that case, we should move, perhaps, if possible. We just lost Lord Anderson, so yes, we'll move on to Iceland. Now, and I cannot pronounce your name. I'm sorry, sir. Excuse me. Thank you. You're muted, so if you could please unmute your mic, sir. In the middle bottom of your screen, sir, there should be a microphone. You should be able to turn it on. Okay. In that case, we still can't hear you. Perhaps you could write your question into the messaging, and then we can answer it there, sir. At this point, I have no further questions, sir.
I know we need to get on, Lord Campbell. Ethan, thank you for moderating the questions. If people have additional questions or comments, they can send them either through the Secretariat or directly to me here in Washington. I want to thank all of my colleagues for their patience. I know this isn't always an easy platform, but the work of the political committee needs to go on. I've been a proud member of this committee since I joined NATO Parliamentary Assembly. This is my 5th white paper, and it's been a privilege to work with all of you, and I look forward to continuing to do so in whatever capacity the future may hold. And with that, back to you, Lord Campbell.
Would you believe it? As soon as you... In a minute. As as soon as you as soon as you started, rather, I was made to stop. And now you've stopped, I'm ready to start. Well, I want to congratulate you on filling an hour very gracefully, but to great effect. And I'm very sorry that so many colleagues are having trouble getting in. But once again, we're very grateful, and I'm also grateful to the questioners. I mean, this whole issue of China, if I may put it colloquially, it ain't going to go away. Well, on that basis, now that I'm a person again, I'm going to transmogrify, as it were, from the position of chairman to rapporteur, special rapporteur. And the reason this came about was that, given the coronavirus, it seemed to me and to others that it made a great deal of sense to have some understanding as how that might affect transatlantic security. And so the report has been issued, and you will all have had the opportunity to read it, I'm sure. But I think it might help to focus attention if I were to say a few words about it now. As Jerry Connolly said earlier, the world has changed dramatically in the last several months. The COVID-19 crisis is a perfect example of those low probability but high impact events that are extremely difficult to prepare for. And in recent years and decades, there were no shortage of warnings about possible global pandemics. However, it's very hard for governments to justify spending on the preparation of something that may never happen. And therefore, when the novel coronavirus emerged in the city of Wuhan, most of our countries find themselves woefully ill prepared. And a crisis of this magnitude inevitably has a major impact on transatlantic security. And this pandemic was almost from the start framed not just as a security issue, but as a war. It seems only consistent with that, therefore, that armed forces have become one of the methods of choice when it comes to combating the virus. Portraying the pandemic as an unprecedented national security threat does convey the urgency and facilitates mobilization of all relevant state and societal assets to tackle the crisis. But I would argue that we should not be overplaying the securitization card. After all, we should also avoid stoking fear, panic, xenophobia, and unnecessary tensions among nations. The crisis is far from over, but I believe we can already see some contours of the post-COVID world order. Some claim that COVID-19 will be a watershed moment in history that will change everything. I would argue that COVID-19 will likely exacerbate and accelerate already existing trends rather than radically alter the course of world politics. For example, globalization was already on the back foot before the first case of COVID-19 ever emerged. However, now the current pandemic is brutally driving home the disadvantages of global supply chains. One can expect the pace of globalization to slow down further. And additionally, in the face of growing international acrimony, international institutions like the G20, United Nations, and the World Health Organization seemed almost helpless when confronted with COVID-19. The de facto absence of global collaboration has resulted in a patchwork of uncoordinated measures and strategies, often in competition with each other for a limited supply of medical goods and protective equipment. It seems inevitable that COVID-19 will accelerate major shifts in major power competition, although at this stage it's difficult to identify potential winners or losers. It's plausible that all major powers will suffer reputational losses, and that we're heading towards an apolar rather than a multipolar world, characterized by a high level of uncertainty and volatility. During the crisis, the United States assumed a US-centric approach and abstained from assuming global leadership, not least of course, because the US is now the hardest hit country in terms of total numbers of cases and deaths. And this approach by the US government is most clearly demonstrated by the recent withdrawal from the World Health Organization. However, it is too early to say if the US disengagement represents an irreversible trend. After all, in the recent past, the US did demonstrate global leadership when dealing with the Ebola crisis. The Chinese government, of which we've heard much, evidently sees itself as the top contender to fill this perceived leadership vacuum. In the early stages of the outbreak, Beijing concealed the severity of the problem and persecuted the whistleblowers. Later, it imposed draconian measures domestically to contain the virus and launched the so-called mass diplomacy campaign, involving the delivery of highly photogenic medical aid to affected countries. This was accompanied by a global propaganda campaign, advertised the Chinese as well as the Chinese model of governance as the most suitable for managing health emergencies of this kind. However, in the report, I argue that China's global reputation has suffered as a result of the pandemic. Beijing's heavy-handed propaganda and bullying of nations, such as Australia, which suggested investigating the origins of the virus, have led to a growing international backlash. Many nations are now taking steps to reduce their dependency on Chinese industry and technology. And let me pause to observe that the United Kingdom government has now taken a decision to withdraw as soon as feasibly possible from the use of technology provided by Huawei. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Moscow has acted out an all too familiar playbook, amplifying conspiracy theories about the virus and engaging in an online disinformation campaign aimed at emphasizing the alleged inefficiency of the democratic West and Euro-Atlantic institutions in the face of major crises. Yet I would argue that Russia might be one of the geopolitical losers of the pandemic. The government handled the crisis poorly, and the concentration of high infection numbers, falling oil prices, and the decreasing popularity of Mr. Putin, notwithstanding his effective rewriting of the Constitution to serve his own interests, might see little choice for China, might see little choice for Russia than to align closer with China in the hope of being bailed out financially by Beijing. COVID-19 will also bring about a host of geopolitical changes in regions like the Middle East and South Asia. But particularly events in the developing world should be watched closely. Developing countries are highly vulnerable to both the spread of the virus as well as its economic repercussions, which could trigger a new wave of turmoil and refugees. Next, the report addresses the question of solidarity demonstrated by NATO and the EU during the COVID-19 crisis. While it's true that both organizations were initially caught off guard by the pandemic, I wanted to demonstrate that NATO and the EU did make tangible contributions to assisting their hardest hit members. I won't go into the details, they're all in the report, but the bottom line is that our alliance proved its resourcefulness and found ways of mobilizing its assets Such, for example, was the Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Coordination Center and NATO strategic airlift capability to help allies and partners, while all the time maintaining adequate levels of preparedness to execute NATO's core tasks of defense and deterrence. The EU members have also sent each other millions in financial terms of protective equipment, tons of medical goods, as well as teams of medical professionals. And there's no doubt that the EU as an organization will play a crucial role in the post-COVID economic recovery. In the current health crisis, the EU and NATO have also cooperated closely in regard to the procurement and transportation of medical supplies, as well as countering disinformation narratives. Overall, NATO and the EU provided far more tangible assistance to its members than China or Russia. But we're not very good at communicating to our domestic audiences about the value of Euro-Atlantic institutions in such crises. The lack of a common and easily communicable transatlantic narrative in COVID-19 has left an opening outside authoritarian powers that are trying to exploit and exacerbate cleavages among members of the Euro-Atlantic community. It may be a cliche, but it's nevertheless true that every crisis presents an opportunity. And in particular, an urgent debate is needed on how to adapt the international system to the realities of the 21st century, including a fairer distribution of the benefits of globalization, adapting to the cyber age, and mitigating climate change. In this debate, NATO and the Euro-Atlantic community as a whole, working together, must take an active and leading role. The post-COVID global security environment is likely to be more adversarial and by increased geopolitical competition. It will be crucial to maintain adequate levels of defense spending in line with the Wales Summit commitment of 2% of GDP. And NATO parliamentarians have a vital role to play in this effort. Although NATO should seek to be better prepared for similar health emergencies in the future, the alliance should not lose sight of its core mission, which is to protect its members from more traditional security threats. With regard to China, there can be no return to business as usual. NATO members must take steps to limit third-party investment in strategic infrastructure and to ensure diversification of vital supply chains like those for medical goods. For this purpose, Allied leaders should provide NATO with a mandate and the resources to advise members on third-party investments in strategic areas. In this respect, coordination with the EU will be vital. Despite their aggressive propaganda, the handling of the crisis by authoritarian and populist regimes was poor. Democratic systems have the possibility of coming out of this crisis stronger, but it requires considered and continued responsible and science-based efforts by governments. It requires solidarity as well as better communication. I will stop there. Once again, we'll end by thanking the Assembly's research team and our research assistant, Michael Trinkwald, for their invaluable contribution to this paper. As I said at the beginning, I would say a little bit more about questions and comments. Jerry Conlon did very well in filling a gap, but I think what would be of more assistance to me and indeed to the research team is if we take all of the contributions from members of the committee together, and unless there is some particular matter upon which I feel it necessary to comment, we will undertake to take the observations of the committee back in our preparation for the next version of this report. I now revert to my role as chairman and invite comments upon the document I have just introduced.
Thank you very much, Lord Campbell. I have a very quick question for you from our technical operators. It seems as though you either have two tabs open for this meeting or you are on two devices, and that is causing an echo when you speak, sir.
Well, I'm not aware of that. I mean,
Okay.
Did the interpreters hear? That's the important thing.
The interpreters were able to hear you, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I will move on to questions at this point. We have Lord Anderson again, and we hope to be able to bring him up. Lord Anderson, you have the floor.
Well, Lord Anderson's a very old friend and a former leader of the British delegation to NATO.
He seems to be having trouble with his internet browser. He's been having that since the beginning of the meeting. Hopefully we can resolve that behind the scenes. With that said, we do not have other questioners at this point. I would like to remind members of the committee to please request the floor by request to speak button on the bottom right hand side of your screen, and then we can bring you onto the floor to have Lord Campbell answer those questions. I'm sure there are several out there. Let me look and see if there's a written question. There are not right now. We do have a question, sir. We have a question for you now, sir. They're coming in right now, sir. There seems to be a bit of a delay, and I apologize for that. There is somewhere in the works, there's a delay. We will now try and bring up Luca Frusoni from Italy.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, I would like to say,
Luca.
oh yes, okay. I would like to speak in Italian, please.
You've gone.
Ok, ringrazio innanzitutto Lord Campbell per la relazione e se posso un suggerimento che in realtà prende spunto proprio dalla nostra prima riunione online che abbiamo fatto come Assemblea parlamentare della Nato, perché si parlava proprio di propaganda russa e cinese in merito al Covid e anche mi colpì questa cosa perché anche ora non ricordo il cognome, ma il funzionario della Nato che intervenne parlò di questo aspetto dicendo che non è tanto, ovviamente noi sappiamo che se Cina e Russia fanno qualcosa lo fanno per motivi di propaganda, però allo stesso tempo non possiamo lamentarci troppo in un certo senso se noi invece come paese o come Nato stessa diamo aiuti e poi non siamo bravi a far vedere gli aiuti che abbiamo dato, nel senso che come diceva lui è ovvio che questi paesi lo fanno prima di tutto per propaganda mentre noi lo facciamo prima di tutto per aiutare, però siccome aiutiamo a quel punto dovremo essere più bravi a spiegare a tutti gli altri paesi che cosa stiamo facendo, quindi questo era un piccolo suggerimento per rafforzare questa capacità della Nato che purtroppo, ma anche di singoli membri, purtroppo non c'è. Io in questi mesi ho sono venuto a conoscenza delle iniziative che la Nato faceva, dei voli e di quant'altro, grazie al collegamento con il nostro rappresentante permanente alla Nato. Però magari un canale, questo è un qualcosa su cui possiamo lavorare, anche un canale diretto, avendo alcune volte dei funzionari dedicati, dove noi parlamentari possiamo ottenere velocemente informazioni e diventare noi stessi una modalità di diffusione di queste notizie, aiuterebbe, perché mentre Russia e Cina sono più preparati a fare la propaganda che a dare gli aiuti, perché il loro obiettivo è quello, noi non dobbiamo fare ovviamente la stessa cosa, ma dobbiamo rafforzare la parte dell'informazione, perché altrimenti ci ritroveremo sempre in queste condizioni, perché molto si fa, io ho visto la relazione parla molto dell'Italia, delle fake news che ci sono state e quindi dei sondaggi che ci sono stati anche su come gli italiani vedono Cina, Russia e Stati Uniti. Tutto questo si può contrastare solamente con una organizzazione che possa non solo rispondere alle fake news, ma anche divulgare le informazioni delle attività fatte. Quindi si potrebbe aggiungere un passaggio su questo per cercare di sensibilizzare un pochino anche la stessa Nato a rafforzare questa cosa. E poi mi permetto solamente un piccolo passaggio, perché c'è una questione che ho seguito personalmente, dove si fa riferimento ad nella relazione si fa riferimento agli aiuti che la Russia ha dato e si cita un giornale italiano che a sua volta citava delle alte fonti che parlavano dell'efficienza di questi aiuti. Io non voglio ovviamente difendere la Russia, però allo stesso tempo, per una questione di metodo, sia quell'articolo tirava in ballo una fonte non verificata, nel senso che chiunque può dire che ci sono delle fonti, delle alte fonti che dicono una cosa senza verificarle, e questo è proprio uno degli elementi delle fake news. Quindi inserire in un rapporto che parla anche di fake news una notizia che ovviamente il relatore non conosce perché è un giornale italiano, però che non fa riferimento a nessun dato confermato, sarebbe una sorta di contraddizione, perché mentre in tutte le altre occasioni ci sono anche delle note dove si parla nello specifico e si citano delle cose concrete e estremamente veritiere, dall'altra parte io credo che nel metodo non sia magari efficace tirare in ballo una fonte che può essere o non può essere verificata, ma questa è una mia opinione. Poi magari a Lord Campbell comunque invierò del materiale sia per quello che dicevo prima, perché è un argomento molto importante secondo me, cioè la capacità di informare meglio, e sia su questo piccolo aspetto. Grazie.
Thank you very much, Luca. I now have a question from Ahmet Yildiz from Turkey. We'll bring him up to the floor.
Hi, Lord Campbell. I will follow on what Luca urged, because this solidarity during pandemic times between allies and their assistance to the other countries are very important, both to strengthen solidarity and to enhance the sympathy to the allies in the world. As Luca said, may I urge Lord Campbell to put a list of the assistance provided by the allies to other allies and to the other nations in the annex of the report. Because, for example, in my notes, I see Turkey, for example, has supplied assistance to 134 countries in different forms. 20 of them are also NATO allies, not to mention the name, but also to Palestine, for example, the most disadvantaged communities. But in the report, I just saw two countries. Then to do our part of this job as NATOPA, I urge to put an annexed list of assistance provided by the allies during the pandemic time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We currently seem to have lost Lord Campbell. He is, I believe, coming back up. We have Andreas Avizis, the director of the political committee, who will now ask another question and perhaps make a clarifying statement. Andreas, please.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ethan. I just wanted to tell the colleagues that we are waiting for Lord Campbell to come back online. But if we do, if he continues to encounter some technical problems, perhaps I could just briefly tell the members quickly about the committee's future plans. As you know, because of the COVID situation, we had to postpone or cancel some of our activities. We'll come back to you, to the members of the committee, regarding potential visits, or at least one visit, a committee visit in the fall. And our next committee meeting will take place on the 31st of August, where we will be discussing two remaining committee reports, subcommittee reports. It will be a report by the subcommittee on NATO partnerships. I see Lord Campbell is coming back online. Hopefully we'll be able to see and hear him soon.
Yes, you can. I have absolutely no influence over this. It just happens or it doesn't happen. So I rather thought you were doing something very clever at your end, but here I am. Do you want to go on, Andreas,
sure.
future activities?
Mr. Chairman, just to tell you that we had two very helpful comments from. If you didn't have a chance to hear them.
I got them.
Okay, great. Okay, and other than that, we don't have any further comments. So I don't know if you would like to wrap up, and just to say that obviously we'll take that into consideration.
Well, yeah. Thank you very much for holding the fort in my absence. We technically have a matter on the agenda entitled "Any Other Business," but I've not received any requests for that, so I'm assuming that there's none. The next item on the agenda is date and place of the next meeting, and that will be on the 31st of August. Further details will be made available in due course. And there's a couple of things I'd like to do, because John Shimkus, whom we heard a little while ago, and Paul Cook, who have been members of the US delegation for many years and have made an enormous contribution, not just to the work of the delegation, but to the work of the Assembly as well. And I personally, and on behalf of the Assembly, would like to thank them for their contributions and to wish them well in what is described as their retirement, but knowing both of them, I suspect it will be a pretty active retirement. That, I think, concludes all of the formal parts of the committee's business. What I can do now then is to thank members for their constructive and participation. I'm sorry so many people were unable to get in, but since I suffered myself to some extent, then I know just exactly how they feel. And again, as we always do, but absolutely correctly, may I express our thanks to the interpreters who have done, as ever, a wonderful job, but on this occasion in particularly challenging conditions, and have allowed us, when the technology allowed us, to communicate effectively. I'd also like to thank the committee director, Andreas Avesius, and he's come through his first meeting with, if I can see, no blows or scars on his back. And also the committee coordinator, Karen Walker-Love. They have worked extremely diligently to make this meeting possible. And I hope they, on my behalf, will convey my thanks and the committee's thanks to the research assistants, as well as those who are in the back room of the technical effort. And so I now formally adjourn this meeting of the political committee, and I hope and expect to see you again on the 31st of August, approximately six weeks away in round figures. By that stage, we will have absorbed the comments that we heard from Luca and Ahmed, with all of which I'm sympathetic, and which would, I think, have expanded, build upon elements already existing in the report. Thank you all once again, and good day.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, I know you've already terminated the meeting, but apparently a minute ago we had one request to speak from our Armenian colleague. I don't know if it is related to the reports that have been discussed, but I'll leave it to you if we should give the floor to the gentleman from Armenia at this stage.
I'm sympathetic to that, but perhaps with the understanding that it's related to the contents of the report, because I know the Armenian delegates in the past have got very strong views about a particular issue, which is not necessarily something that falls within the ambit of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. But if we can be assured that it's about the report, then I'm happy to make well, not so much an excuse, but I'm happy to make an opportunity for a contribution. I see a name, but no face. I see a face.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you speak more slowly and distinctly?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Lord Campbell. Actually, my question is about COVID-19 pandemic and the countries that in this situation when everybody speaks about uniting the forces, uniting the efforts to fight against pandemic.
Mr. Gogosian, if you move your phone like that, it's very difficult for us to hear you, sir. If you please put your phone in one place and not move it. Thank you very much.
Like this?
Are you on the telephone?
Yes, I'm on.
I think. Well, I know this from my own experience. You must treat it as if it was solid, if you see what I mean. Don't allow it to move.
Okay. Is it all right now? Is it okay now? Okay. Thank you very much. So my question is, you may know about the last day's aggression from Azerbaijan to Armenia, but the question is not about that. The question is about Turkey. Turkey is a member of Minsk OSCE group and NATO member state, but they strongly voiced that they support what Baku did, the aggression. So what do you think? Is this acceptable from the NATO member country, OSCE Minsk group country? Or in this situation, when all the world fights against pandemic, fights against COVID-19, and there is a NATO member state country that supports violence against another country, supports violence against civilians, attack of civilian infrastructure. Is it normal for you? How you think? What you think about all this?
Well, as the chairman of the committee, I don't think I'm in a position to offer an opinion. And although you said quite carefully that this was about the virus, in fact, as you progressed in your observation, it was about something rather different. We've heard what you say, but I don't think I can usefully make any comment. I think that
I will state that our president, if I may, Lord Campbell, I will state that our president, Attila Mestre, has released a statement regarding the current escalation of tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So refer to the NATO PA website for that, sir.
Very good. Well, there's a better answer than I was able to give. Okay, can we wrap up? And I'll give you a call, Andreas, as soon as I finish. Thank you very much, Ethan. Taken away from the rough and ready defence to the more sophisticated parts of the assembly, namely politics.
Thank you, sir. We will be having our Defense Committee meeting tomorrow. We're happy to have you attend, sir.